The reason we have zero trust is because we recognize the world is connected.
The supply chain is huge.
It's a thread across all of them, right?
But you can see it impacts more on certain industries than others. How challenging are your legacy systems? 50% of our U.S. federal clients said that they're very challenging.
Welcome to CGI Voices, where CGI's experts share insights on the latest in federal government management, policy, and technology. I'm your host, Pete Tseronis. Hi, this is Pete Tseronis, and I am super excited to be back here on CGI Voices talking to a dear friend and colleague, Miss Molly O'Neill. It's great to see you.
It is so good to see you, Pete.
So let me brag a little bit about you. Molly O'Neill, officially director and CGI expert. I've known you forever. Molly, your role in government helped influence my journey. You are a former chief information officer. You were the former assistant administrator in the Office of Environmental Information at the EPA. You are responsible for everything strategically, from strategy to policy to technology and data. And we're going to get into some of that today with the great work you're doing here at CGI. But everybody who's tuning in, since 2009, Molly has served as a fellow at the National Academy of Public Administration, very involved beyond government and industry and just moving the needle in her own passionate way. And she is a Virginia Tech Hokie. So hopefully that allows people to get a sense of a little bit of your journey, but I'd like you to tell it because you're the best storyteller of your own story.
Yeah, so, I mean, you and I did meet when we were both working in government, and it's really good to see you. And obviously, you know that I was the CIO for EPA for a couple years, and that was a great job for me because I have both an environmental policy background and a technology background, and I had government experience, so that was just a fantastic journey for me because I was able to kind of put all of my sort of passions together in one role. So it was really, really fun for me.
And just to shed some light on that and the fact that working in government, especially in a position where you are an appointee,
right.
You may have a not a shelf life, but you have a limited time to get a lot of things done. Just how was that feeling versus somebody who was a civilian and could stick around for a while? Yeah,
you know what? No one's really asked me that question before, and I will tell you, I had someone who had the job before me come and whisper into my ear about, I would say, a month into the job, and they said, you have 2 years to get stuff done. What are you doing about it? And it just motivated me like you wouldn't believe. And that was the best advice I ever heard. And then I had a coach, and a lot of people don't know this. And I had a coach from the outside and someone who'd said to me, they got on the call with me once a month and said, tell me your 3 priorities again and how you're doing on them. Forget all the noise out there, Molly. What are the 3 things that you're doing to make a difference? And I will tell you, again, really good advice.
Well, I love the idea of having the goal setting and the objectives and getting something done in a time frame. But before we get into that, what brought you to CGI, right? I mean, you had this wonderfully decorated career. You're still active, involved in the Beltway. But what brought you here, and what do you really love about it?
Yeah, so before I had the appointment in the federal government, I was working for a nonprofit, the Environmental Council of the States, where we were building this giant information data exchange using data standards and standard protocols to move environmental data over the internet for the first time in real-time basis. And it was almost like working for a startup, right? So I had sort of the environmental business going on there. And even before that, I worked in technology and management consulting, where I was focused on the environmental and health industry. So after my appointment, it seemed like CGI was a good fit for me, first because they did a lot of work in the environmental business, and of course they're well-known in technology. So it was a really good leap. So coming to CGI was a good fit for Molly O'Neill.
Wow, it seems like it's a great fit. So look, you mentioned the word data, which is never not a hot term in government or industry. For our audience, data by itself is raw. When it becomes contextual, it could provide information that in the case of the environment or defense or what have you, it's actionable intelligence. I love, as we begin to segue into, and I'm going to ask you to kind of give this overview of the CGI voice of our clients, its purpose, how it works, what's the process. But one of the things I will say that I loved was that it's providing actionable insights for a return on investment-led digital transformation, which may sound very generic, but actionable insights is to me what caught my attention. So why don't we segue into that? What is this program and what value is it bringing to everybody and anybody globally?
Yeah, yeah, and I'm happy to be working on that again this year for CGI because it is really an interesting process. So the voice of the clients, if I have to strip it down, is really, it's a comprehensive study of one-on-one interviews between CGI leaders and executives, both business and IT, who talk about what are the trends, what are the priorities, what are the challenges they're seeing, what are they focused on now, and where do they think they're going to be focusing in the next 3 years. And so it's a sit-down discussion and to take a look at how they're feeling about things. And we do this annually just to give you perspective.
Yeah.
And since 2018, we've had 8,000 of these one-on-one interviews, right? Giving us 1 million data points in terms of what IT priorities are, business priorities are, and everything else. And we do that across 22 sub-industries. So I know we're here to talk about the federal results, but the reality is this is a global project. So we are asking the same questions to all of these global industries. And it's just fantastic in terms of the amount of rich data and then how we use it.
So let me clarify, or should I say just as a follow-on, it just caused my neurons to fire a bit. I know that the federal government can benefit from this program, but the idea that you're globally, or you're expanding this beyond the Beltway, right, beyond our country, looking at other industries, the sectors we were talking about earlier, the most critical in our country, energy, manufacturing, transportation, what have you, water, air. I love that you kind of stated that it's not just a government thing, right? Technology is agnostic, and these stakeholders that you are engaging. Can you talk a little bit about what that's been like, where it's like, let's just talk about technology from the standpoint of it's not the problem. It's more a matter of, does it map to your needs and requirements?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's part of it. So when you talk to, and you have these one-on-one interviews, you're asking about their business priorities, you're asking about the industry trends, and you're asking about the technology priorities. And for me, what I do is I look at all the data that comes across, and I'm trying to figure out, are there gaps? And maybe they're not making progress, or an industry is not making progress, or an organization is not making progress because there's a gap between the business priority and the IT priority. So it's really interesting to see.
So question, business priority, IT priority, I'm thinking right off the top of my head, that's not just a CIO conversation. You mentioned that, you meet with executives. Was this spanning the C-suite?
Correct.
Okay, so what's some of the profiles of the people? Because I would imagine there's the strategic arm, but then there's tactical. Talk a little bit about that profile of the folks that you interview.
Yeah, and obviously it depends on, who's doing the interview and what kinds of access that we have and who's willing to do the interviews, right? But the profile is different. And what we do within the data, let's say it's an acquisition officer versus a CIO, right? Or even a
CFO
or
a chief
CFO,
data
right?
Officer.
We do identify who they are and understand their profile in terms of would they be more of a digital native or not, and things like that, understanding what some of the issues are. So we do bucket these in terms of the kinds of responses we're getting, whether they're more on the business side or on the IT side. Again, that's interesting to look at the data at a really in-depth level when you do that to figure out, again, where these gaps might be. But you'd be amazed at how they kind of come together.
Well, that's where I was going,
Right.
Molly. You've been in the role in a very hierarchical environment, the government, where you have a CIO and that box on an org chart, and it's vertical focus on architecture and operations, but being someone who had to build those bridges, connect those dots across the mission owner, is that something that commercial industries face as not a challenge, but something that technology bringing people together? Is that what you're finding too when you talk about these data assets?
Yeah. I mean, remember, these are one-on-one interviews, and so we're asking the questions around, do you have a digital strategy and how far does it go, right? Is it tagged to a program, or is it more enterprise-wide? And, how do you think you're doing with that? And those kinds of questions that kind of help you determine some of those interactions and things. Obviously, if things are highly expandable in terms of the enterprise, some of those relationships are a little bit stronger, or the business priorities are a little bit more aligned. But if we, flip that to the federal government, right? So if I look at the data around federal government, a lot of the digital strategies that we have, and we saw the data say that most of the folks are focused on what I will say very programmatic, like trying to integrate data at a program level versus an enterprise level yet right now. And it makes sense in a lot of ways, Pete, because some of these federal agencies are huge, right? Mm-hmm. So if you can't get your one shop together, it's going to be hard to have a strategy that is enterprise-wide to have a huge effect, right? And so some of that makes sense, as long as we're making progress within those. I hate to use the word stovepipe. It's kind of an old saying.
Cylinder of excellence.
Yes, a cylinder of excellence. I like that, yes.
I learned that at the Federal Executive Institute, so I was like, oh my gosh, that's such a cooler way and nicer way of saying there are stovepipes.
Right.
CGI Voice of Our Clients, it's an annual, that I hear that it's an annual thing that is ongoing, and that you publish reports and things like that people can view. Is it publicly available?
Yeah, so actually, let's take a step back, and I'll say it's an annual thing, and it's continuous. Yes. So, let's walk through a typical year, in this process. We start interviewing people, in the winter, let's just say, for making it easy. And we then compile the results during the spring. And it's really important that we do that because we're using the results of where the priorities are for our own strategic planning process. So in the summer, as we're beginning to do things, we're rolling out the reports, looking at the data from different kinds of sub-industries and industries, and be able to publish those. And those are becoming online now so that the public can read them as well. And then, again, we use them for our own planning. We share the results back to those that have participated and the public and those who are just interested, right? And then guess what? We start the process again because we're refining the questions so that we can actually start again with more interviews the next year. So it's just a continuous cycle.
I love it. And again, in the wonderful world of the Beltway, where there's always an IT transformation agenda, there's always a topic that is hot, AI, elements of AI, right, quantum information science. And let's not forget the fact that, at the end of the day, the data informs decision making. Data has become that strategic asset. And I'm sure that is something that is being emphasized. So thank you for just getting a sense that, to our audience, continuous improvement on the program, but also continuously staying relevant to the trends happening in society, right? That technology can enable. We know our infrastructure law, the Inflation Reduction Act, the CHIPS and Science Act. There's so much out there that needs technology to create a more resilient future.
And not only that, we look at macro trends too. So if you look at industries, so what are the macro trends that are impacting your business too? Is it social demographics? Is aging population? Clearly something that is impacting the federal government, and that came through the results, right?
Wow.
Is it, digital transformation? Absolutely. But is it also sort of world economic order? Is it climate? Is it all of these other things? So we're not asking just, what are your IT priorities? We're saying, what are also the macro trends that may be impacting a business or an organization if we talk about, the federal government?
I love it. And I mean,
and clearly in some industries, like the federal government, right, is going to be, and again, this comes through the data, that we're presenting, is, macro trends around social demographics, aging population, and through the aging population, and all the digital transformation is huge in government. But if you look at other industries like, manufacturing or something else, the supply chain is huge. Mm-hmm. You can say supply chain is an issue.
It's a thread across all of them, right?
But you can see it impacts more on certain industries than others.
Appreciate that. So thank you for emphasizing yet again that this program that's just continuously evolving is really not treating technology as the focus, but how is mission being enabled or lack thereof by it. Okay, so let's jump in to some of, and I'm looking at just some material I gleaned, the top trends and priorities. You mentioned macro trends, industry trends, business priorities, IT priorities, all on a level playing field, not buy IT and it'll solve all your problems. I see an example of a macro trend, technology and digital acceleration for audience, an industry trend, IT modernization and cloud services, business priorities, organizational protection for rising cyber risks, and an IT priority could be modernization of data centers, consolidation in cloud. So The trends and priorities, talk a little bit about just some in the most recent effort that are really highlighted as things people are concerned or care about.
Yeah, so let's talk about, and remind me to hit all three of them, but if I look at them, I thought there was sort of three takeaways from a lot of the data that you just talked about. We could spend hours talking about all the data points, but let's just talk about maybe three. First one is cyber, and you mentioned that there, and I think there is this thread as both a business priority and a technology priority on cybersecurity. And the thing that kind of stood out to me in the results, I think it was 71% of our U.S. federal clients said that they are currently implementing or have a fully operational cybersecurity program. Now, what that means to me is that the federal government, and in terms of a lot of other priorities out there, that's probably the one that's seeing what they perceive as seeing the most results, meaning they're finding things, or their employees aren't hitting that button when they're testing them. Things are moving and they're feeling more comfortable in their cyber programs. And again, to me, the interesting thing, and I think you and I have talked about this in previous conversations in another life maybe, is one of the reasons they're feeling a little bit more comfortable. And we all know cyber, you don't feel that comfortable in it. But in terms of standing up programs, at least, and feeling more comfortable, is that there are reasons for that, right? There are mandates in place. There have been dollars put in place, right? There have been contract vehicles put in place.
We have a new national cybersecurity strategy that gets updated based on things that happen when colonial pipelines are hit or a hurricane happens. So it's never going away.
It's never going away. So it's not, but there was this feeling as I'm looking through the data that says, looking at this year, people are, and again, I don't use the word comfort in the typical word. I'm just saying that I think that the data is showing that they feel that they are starting to make progress on their cyber programs. And so that's how I would term the data.
You know what I love, Molly, is back in the day, aging myself, computer security, passwords, protection, there's the evolution. Cybersecurity, if I may, like this program, it's constantly evolving. I like to use the word cybersecurity, physical security, environmental security. I mean, this is where we can never eliminate it, right? But we can mitigate it. And I would hope that 71% of through these interviews that people are making progress, and at least it's staying very serious.
Yeah, and that progress could be defined by them as, gosh, we're finding threats earlier, right? We are able to isolate them better. Our tools are picking things up, and it also could be something, and we all know one of the biggest threats is the human part of it, which is, we're clicking on bad links and we're doing those things, and there's been a lot of education out there with employees and things, and so maybe there's fewer of those things happening as well, where people are, when you're trying to stimulate phishing techniques and things, that there are fewer, employees actually clicking on those links.
Because that's a big part of what appears to be every approach to reskilling, retaining, recruiting, and as CGI, it's hey, we can come and help you with your technology deployment, but educating a workforce that you mentioned is aging. Educating a workforce that is familiar with tech but needs to understand or help that other generation that there are things and clues you have to look out for. The bad actor is still trying to get you to so how much of that workforce and education this past year was the focus of this voice of our clients effort?
So we did ask them, what are the things that you're doing to improve your cybersecurity posture? And those were, the number two ones, if I recall the data correctly, were making sure you know where all your critical assets are, right? And the second one was making sure your employees are trained. So because there's a level of this, of this data that we're not just asking about their priorities, but we're diving deeper into some of these areas with them. Okay. That's a good example of that. Those were the top two.
I love it. I think there's never enough opportunity out there to help educate the world, whether it's, again, I always bring my mom up, but look, there are folks who still are intimidated by tech, and we have to recognize it's part of our life now, whether it's the phone you carry or how you do communications through.
And it's becoming harder and harder to, some of these, techniques that are out there are getting harder and harder. I remember I got an email yesterday, internally, and I thought, I'm not sure this is a test for me or not. I mean, I had to really think about it and look at it. I'm like, I'm not clicking on anything here. 'Cause even if I question it, I don't do it.
Err on the side
right?
of caution, right?
Exactly.
So you asked me to remind you.
Yes.
You said there were three.
Right.
What's number two?
Two was really, and these two are linked.
Okay.
Legacy systems and modernization. Modernization was a huge. It was a business priority and IT priority. Obviously, modernization is important from a technology standpoint, but it went hand to hand with another question that we asked, which is, how challenging are your legacy systems? And 76% of our U.S. federal clients said they're at least somewhat challenging. 50% said that they're very challenging.
Wow.
So then I had to look at the data again because, I like to dive into the data and what it might mean.
It's the data scientist in you.
It is. I wish I had that title when I was coming out of school. But I want to know why it is what it is. So we have this really challenging issue with legacy systems still, right? They're still really having issues with them. And then we're looking at, our priority is to modernize these things. And while it looks like most people, there's a huge percentage of people in different stages of modernization, it's a smaller set that they said they're seeing results yet. And so I had to kind of step back, right, and say, well, why is that? Well, and especially because these things are so challenging then, it's probably because unlike cyber, right, security, where there's mandates and everything, it's complicated when you have lots of tools to pick from, changing priorities, and maybe different opinions on what kind of modernization you're going to do. Are you going to simply replatform that, application? And I don't mean simple, because that's not simple to take something and maybe move it to the cloud.
Rip and replace.
Right, exactly. There's no such thing as a rip and replace, I wish. Or is it more transformational modernization that's going to say, wow, we need to rethink how citizens are interacting with this, how we interact with this, how we're going to get data out of it, what kind of data, where are we asking for the wrong thing? Those are hard engagements to stay focused on, right?
So let me, because I want to get to three, and I want to just, for what I heard is you use the word modernize, transform, which I think are different. You can modernize legacy, but to transform might require, let's
totally
think, right? And would you agree that innovation ultimately is what we're trying to get at?
Yeah.
Because the IoT world, the ubiquitously connected world, the sensor, the reason we have zero trust is because we recognize the world is connected, and how can we trust anything? But I loved your frame of reference and your questions is the world's changing. We have to start thinking differently. Is that something that you're finding, executives and folks are starting to think differently about how to deploy IT?
Yeah, and I think that's where it becomes a little bit more challenging, right? Because it does require a lot of
complex.
thinking. And it means a lot of people in the same room, right? It means bringing the business and technology together. And I'd argue maybe that business needs to lead. And a lot of, on the business side or the analyst side aren't ready and comfortable thinking, gosh, I need to radically change something. It's a feeling, and do I have the authority to do that, right?
I will say that we're getting to three, but you just said it. CGI leaders meet with business and IT executives to gather perspectives on trends affecting their enterprises. And kudos to you, but shout out to Molly. I think that's that when you were in government too, I know, in that limited time, bringing people together, having those conversations, and everybody walking out saying, the train left the station. Technology's not slowing down, but we have a lot more to think about. So that's a great, great, great enlightening moment for me. What's the third?
Okay, third one to me really stood out. Okay, and so we asked a series of questions, and it was a priority on automation, and that includes simple automation, RPA, enhanced modernization, enhanced automation.
Buzzword bingo, but yep, everybody knows what they mean. Robotic process automation, people.
Thank you. Algorithmic and AI, artificial intelligence. And we kind of asked them where they are in the scale of things, right? Do you have a lot of projects going on? Are you implementing things? Are you seeing results from some of these efforts? And if we looked at the federal data, and at first I was taken a little bit back, and most of the results obviously are in simple automation, right? But when I dove deeper And by the way, there was an increase. I think it was like from the previous year, it was RPA was up 17 percentage points from the previous year, which is pretty big. So moving sort of down the chain of automation, right?
People getting used to it, liking it, understanding it. It's not a plug and play.
And using it
Right.
and starting to see results from it. Things are easier, right? But when I dug deeper into the data and I looked at it, it said, gosh. And by the way, in terms of seeing results, there was nothing on the almost zero in terms of results. Seeing results on the other side of automation, meaning AI and algorithmic, in my case, sort of seeing this as a hierarchy. But I dove deeper into the data, and the reality is there was over 70% of federal agencies and clients that we interviewed said that they are doing some kind of proof testing or investigation on AI. And again, so we asked these questions a couple of months ago, and I can only imagine what it is now. So lots and lots going on. And then I looked at the global results. So to me, there was an indicator saying, okay, everyone's doing research and investigating and starting to do some proof of concepts. So maybe that actually means real projects are coming down the pipe. And if you look at the data globally, even with global government, you can see that trend shifting towards movement in terms of doing more projects and actually starting to see some results from some things on a global scale. And if you look at other industries, obviously the data is much further out there in terms of more projects and starting to see some results from all those things. So to me, it's probably the biggest indicator out there that says there's a lot moving. The government's looking at it. They're not quite pulling the chain on a lot of things yet because they're waiting for things, right? And, you and I know, so government is held to a much higher standard than a lot of other folks. If they go out there and implement something that's not ethical, on AI, or create some kind of random algorithmic thing, it's not going to fly with the public.
Well, your history and just today, policy, technology, government, culture, looking at new tools. This is where I see CGI and not just your voice of our clients, but the team, the culture at CGI is to inform, enlighten, educate, whatever the verb is, agencies to think a little differently because you're staying ahead of the trends. And these findings from, cyber strategy maturation, modernizing, even though there are challenges, how do we mitigate risk? And then you just pointed out in your third leg of the stool, the use of automation that's expanding requires an understanding of the tool, not just buy it, plug it in. And this is nothing, to the OEM world, but we need the help. I used to say when I was the CTO at Department of Energy and Education, help me understand that the capabilities that I'm buying will map to my requirements today. We buy Lamborghinis, we sometimes implement like a jalopy. Well, we need industry to be that's trusted strategic partner. And I get a sense this program, and knowing you, CGI offers that to its government, customers.
Yeah, I think you actually summarized it really well, those 3 points. There's a lot of opportunity out there for government.
So let Molly, sorry,
It's
little
fine.
nickname there. We have a few minutes left, but can you just what is causing your neurons to fire, those synapses to kind of just go a little crazy at the moment? What do you see? What are some of the trends you personally think are going to be front and center over the next year?
Yeah, I think obviously AI is one that everyone is talking about. I think that we're going to see, we're already seeing stuff from OSTP come out in terms of the Bill of Rights and things like that. It's probably one of the most hyped thing out there right now. But to me, it's going to be interesting to see how the federal government embraces it, because again, I do think sort of the ethical part of it and wanting to do things right is a tough balance between staying competitive in a market and showing citizens that government can react quickly. So it's going to be an incredible balance, and probably one of the ones we haven't seen in a long time.
Well, Molly, I just want to thank you, for the time. I'd love to keep talking to you for hours, and we will offline. Look, you're a learner. You're curious. I love that about you, and I appreciate all this great work you're doing with and on behalf of CGI. I think your Voice of Our Clients program is one that should be emulated, but kudos to that and to all those who helped support the program. I view you as maybe you weren't when you came out or you wanted that title of data scientist, but hearing you today, it's like I think that's something that you've had in you for a long time, and data is the fuel for innovation. So thank you for being here on CGI Voices, and I look forward to another conversation.
Thanks, Pete. I appreciate it.
All right. You can find CGI Voices on your preferred podcast platform or watch the video version on YouTube. Subscribe or follow and spread the word to your colleagues. CGI Voices, expert insights for federal decision makers.